You got your mama's sunshine, you got your daddy's rain. You're like a piece of heaven in a hurricane.
Hey there, thanks again for listening to this podcast. We appreciate you guys. I don't know if we say that enough, but we really do. And how much fun is it when we are at an event or we're walking around town and somebody I was at Costco the other day and a kid said, "Hey, you're that guy from the podcast," and it was just so cool, you know. And it's funny because he didn't know me from the church, which is normally how people know us because we have a big church in a smaller town, and so we're kind of like locally known, because of the church. But this kid had he said, "You're that guy from the podcast." I thought it was pretty kind of cool.
It breaches so many barriers. I mean, with young, older, and I think you can go out there and people appreciate it. They really do.
The best compliment I got, though, was this morning because my girls were having breakfast, and I said, "Romy, you're going to go to the podcast with me, and Nana's going to take you from there." And my older one, Olive, said, "She gets to go to the podcast? That is not fair." She really wanted to come, so
I remember those days in my house.
and I did send books to everybody that wrote me.
Did you?
I love that.
I did. I sent several books out, and
that's cool.
If you want a copy of my book, I'll just write me at pastorronvbf.org. And just mention the podcast, anything you want to mention, and I'll send you a book.
Well, I'm a little bit, you guys all have your drinks today. I'm doing the fasting thing this morning, so I'm a little bit tired, but I am excited because the weather's changing. I love this time of year.
I do too, Josh.
When fall starts to happen, I feel like it's time to pull out almost time to pull out the flannels and
I get disappointed when it gets hot because I'd like to wear a long sleeve shirt.
Me too. Yeah, me too. Mine's for other reasons. I try to hide, my physique here. But no, I'm excited about the fall. I'm excited about Vince and I went hunting. You can't say hunting because that's
hunting.
You gotta say hunting. We went hunting the other day, which really means we walked around with guns in our hands. So that's what hunting was.
Well, it's exercise.
Yeah, it was great exercise.
Well, for a long time when I was hunting deer, I didn't go. I should say. Let me rephrase that. I never left disappointed if I didn't get a deer because what I really enjoyed was sitting on the mountainside, overlooking the forest, eating a bologna sandwich.
Yeah, it was beautiful out there. It really was. I'm pretty sure. So Vince wanted to camp overnight, and so we camped 500 yards off the road.
I've heard some of these stories.
And I'm pretty sure that we camped right in the middle of a lion den because there was all kinds of tracks, and it was we heard lots of noises at night. It was fun. But his 16-year-old was just kept asking all night, "What's that noise? What's that noise?"
Oh, it was like, and Josh had him going too because Josh was adding the extra, ghost story that you tell at the campfire to the whole thing. And so at 2:00 in the morning, my 16-year-old was like, "Dad, do you hear that? Here's something breathing." I'm like, "Shut up." I'm like, "Go back to bed."
You know what? I want to say something to a listener out there today. I think it's a word for them. You can't stop living.
No.
And your son will never forget this.
Nope.
You're building memories that will last for a lifetime. Because you have memories when I used to take you out.
The best memories, yeah.
And so anyway, it's a word for someone right here. You're listening to the podcast, and the very reason you're listening today, for you, it's to hear the word, don't stop living. Get out there and involve yourself in some adventure.
And I think of dads, fathers who are listening to this, or mothers as well, who maybe they didn't have those positive experiences as kids. And so you don't think about it being a positive experience for them to hang out with you, but it really is. And so make sure you take that time. And it's hard because it gets busy.
Yeah.
This time of year, school's at full swing. You have sports. You have, a lot of different things happening. It seems like there's more extracurricular activities these days than ever. And so just make sure you take that time to really spend with your family because it's really important.
You know what, Josh? It reminds me of an illustration. I wish I could look it up. I used it in a sermon years ago. And it goes something like this. A dad took his son out, and they went somewhere hunting, fishing, or something. Everything went wrong that could go wrong. Everything went wrong. And he came back griping to his wife, "Worst day of my life. I hate it. Man, it was just a terrible day, blah, 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 blah." And later on, she found something that her son had written about that day and said, "The best day of my life." A whole different perspective.
My dad tried so hard to get me interested in fishing. But I have so many memories of being with him when he would get us up at 3 a.m., we'd
Yeah.
go out. He would go out and we'd try to fish for catfish. And none of us really, my dad tried. And so, so I remember waking up the next morning and I couldn't figure out what it was, but it was a huge swarm of mosquitoes around me. And they were just feasting on me. And I remember that, but I remember the good part of that. The getting up, driving someplace, the hope of doing something. I remember that, even though the mosquitoes were there, that wasn't the story. It was just, getting there. And like you said, Pastor, it was a true story.
Yeah.
And my brother, it stuck with my brother. He loves fishing and that. And I just, I preferred other things. But I remember being with my dad.
Josh, remember Mammoth?
Yeah, I do.
We sunk the boat. We get out early in the morning to go fishing, and we sunk the boat.
The fact that you got you bought one of those air up mattress boats, what I'm talking about, those like rubber boats.
Yeah.
You bought one of those and took it out into the Twin Lakes area. And I remember, we were out there for a few minutes.
Oh, that water's cold.
And then it just started. I'm like, there's water in here.
Oh no!
I remember, didn't you have to walk out?
Yeah, we went back
Kinda
wet.
swam out. Yeah, that was fun. But yeah, no, those memories, and that's just it. That's a great point because as parents sometimes, and I'm learning this. I have little ones. Vince, you have a 16-year-old all the way down to almost 7-year-old, and you think we stress about doing it right. But sometimes it's just about doing it, and when you mess up, even that's
the
okay.
experience.
It's
But
all right,
can't we get so caught up in our career or whatever that we forget to keep having fun?
Well, I did a teaching at this last man cave where I talked about Jephthah, who was a mighty warrior who was kicked out of the tribe, and then it said, that these worthless people came around him, and they went back and they needed him, so they pulled him back in. And so he made a vow to God, and he said, whatever, just give me this victory. Whatever comes out of my house, I'm going to, to greet me. And he's probably thinking an animal of some sort. I'm going to sacrifice to you. And then his daughter comes out, and he ends up, having to fulfill that vow, which is a terribly dark story. But I think that the meaning of that story was that he won the war, but he lost his family in the process.
There you go.
And I think that it's so easy for men at least, and some women as well, it's easy for us to get so focused on the wins, on the, financial side of things or the success side of things or whatever it might be, and forget the win of being there for your family and just paying attention. I watched this documentary too, real quick, I'll just say this fast. I watched this documentary for school that follows these two families from the 1990s all the way till the current times, right? Follows them their whole lives and shows how all the different struggles that they have. And there's this one family who the mother and father worked really hard. They tried really hard. They just hustled. They did the best they could, but that life kept getting in the way. Things kept happening. Circumstances happened where at the end they were okay. They were like a middle class family. But the director asked the woman, the mom, said, "Do you feel like a failure?" And she tears up and she says, "Yes, because I don't have much to leave my kids with." But then he asked her another question. He said, "Do you think your kids think you're a failure?" And she said, "I think that they love me enough not to tell me that I am, but I'm watching it as an outsider thinking you're not a failure. Like you raised a family.
Yes.
Like you were there for these kids. You were there for your husband like this whole time.
Right.
Yeah. That's a success. A huge success.
Right.
It's your anniversary today, Dad. I mean, you've been married for 54 years. Congratulations.
Congratulations. What a story.
That's a feat. That's a success. You could have all the money in the world, you could have all the fame in the world, but who has that? Who has a marriage of 54 years?
I want to go back again and speak to a listener possibly. We were the couple that probably wouldn't make it. I mean, when we were in our 20s, if people around us were betting on our relationship lasting, everybody would have bet against us. We were the couple, and I guess this morning your mother was real cute. "Good morning, sweetheart. We've been married 54 years, and nobody thought we'd make it, and we made it." And so there's another word to some of you out there today. We only made it because we were totally committed to God. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made it. And so anyway, those are good points, Josh. I like that. And so I think we're already just in our introduction speaking to people out there.
Well, and I want to share this story, and I think it may turn this another direction right now. But Pastor, how many times have we been on trips together, and they just don't seem like they're working out? I think about Ethiopia.
I'm thinking of all of them.
But why we're able to laugh here now is that they did.
They did work out in the end.
Because we did. So you remember when we went to Mulahey and Vince and Josh were going to do a documentary?
Uh-huh.
And remember, Vince and Josh got up late. Remember that morning you guys got up late?
It's possible.
And we were driving to Mulahey, and I think it was 9 o'clock. We were like, all the fishermen are gone. We wanted to take, we wanted to video fishermen.
That's right.
And you stopped and you go, okay, Tom, you're in charge. And I was like, what do you mean? Well, we figured out what we're going to do. And I was like, okay, that wasn't my initial duty, but I will. We prayed. And so we took the lead, and we were driving, and we prayed specifically that we would find Yamaha. Remember that?
Yamaha, that was his name.
Yeah, what we called him because he had a Yamaha motor on his boat.
I thought it was his real name. It wasn't?
No, it was. They called him Yamaha because everybody else had different engines, and he had a Yamaha engine
I
on
always
his
thought
boat.
it was his name.
And so we said, let us find Yamaha. And so as we were driving, we pulled into a bar. And you're like, what are we doing here? I go, we're looking for fishermen. And Hector went in and spoke Spanish. And they said, well, where the fishermen go are right down this road. So we were on the right track.
But didn't they say it's too late? You won't find any down there?
They said, but what are you looking for? We're looking for fishermen. There's no fishermen there.
They've already gone out.
So we were driving down there, and we turned. And as we approached there, out in the middle of the inlet was one guy, and he was pulling on his motor.
Yeah.
And Yamaha had a very distinct hat. It was big and round. And I'm like, that's Yamaha. And we walked out there, and it was Yamaha. Remember that? And he's like, hey, Pastor Tom, Pastor Ron, what are you doing? I go, we're looking for a fisherman. He goes, oh, my boat won't start. And Pastor, you said this. Try it again. And it
We prayed in between.
And it came back to shore. And we're like, okay, Josh and Vince, we got a fisherman. Remember that?
I do remember.
But I'm just saying, it wasn't the fact that things were working out. It was the fact that we were making the best of it, and God factor came involved and made it all work out.
Tom, would life be, if you look back on life right now, would it have been nearly this much fun if we weren't walking with God?
No.
God is what's made it fun.
Because you can see that it all doesn't depend on your success in a moment.
Right.
Or even what success looks like. I remember, Pastor, even Mulahey, you and I were walking up, and we were with another group, and we were giving away food. And we started noticing that these people weren't getting food. Remember that, Pastor?
Yeah.
And we were walking up, and the church had given money, so we had bought the food. And so we asked the person that was in charge, why are we not stopping at that house? Are we going to hit them on the way back? And they go, no, we're not going to stop at those houses because they aren't Christians. They don't go to our church.
Blew me away.
And so Pastor looked at me, and we both set our bags down. And Pastor goes, we'll be back. And he goes, where are you going to go? We're going to buy more food. You guys keep handing this food out, but we're going to go back. Remember that, Pastor?
Tom, it was like it was yesterday.
Yes.
I remember walking up and giving all these Christian people food.
Yeah.
And all these people standing in front of their house.
Looking at
And
us.
if you could have read their minds, it was like, why won't you give us any food?
Yeah. Because we walked up to the first one, and we said, do you need food? They go, yeah. But they never give us food. We're like, why?
Because we're not Christians. We don't go to their church.
And it was that moment. It was in that moment that you think God redirects you, and it looks like, hey, it's not working. Well, who says it's not working?
Right.
So
that's good.
Just in that vein, what we're talking about today is this is kind of part two of these moments, these God moments, these God stories is what we call them, and just talking about our own experiences and kind of evaluating why we believe that God literally showed up in those moments. Another story, and Vince and I, just for the background, so you guys understand, Vince and I have done video production for a long time. Don't do it as
You
much
guys
anymore.
were doing it before people were really doing it.
We were doing it before.
You guys were.
We
You were,
really
Josh.
were, Tom.
You were.
We did it before YouTube existed, so it was a long time. We did skate videos back in the day. But we were doing a video, Dad, with you for an Easter service, and we had the drone flying.
Oh, man.
And this drone was flying through the air. We were in a wooded area up near Ojai, California. We were walking around, and it was woodsy. There was branches on the ground and leaves. It was kind of fall, or no, it was winter actually. And we as we're getting this drone shot, the drone just takes a nosedive and just hits, and then goes into a tree, hits a branch, and just tumbles down, right? And we're like, oh no, is the drone okay? We go look, the drone is okay, but
Right.
but if you know anything about drones, they shoot on what they call micro SD cards, which are about the size of your index
your
finger
Fingernail.
Yeah.
And so it's gone. It popped out.
And not only to make things, it's like tan in color.
Yeah.
It's like it's not bright green.
Right.
It's not bright red.
Orange.
It's like this really tan color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tiny
It's the
little
color of the
Leaves.
the stuff on the ground.
Yes.
So we can't find it, and we're like, okay, well, that shot's done. Not only is that shot done, it's kind of like that that drone is done. Like, yeah, our time.
We wasted
like,
our time.
We had already done the main part of the sermon or message we wanted to do.
Yeah.
We'd already filmed it.
Right.
It was all lost.
And we
Well,
had
the
other
drone
footage
part, yeah.
on that drone footage that we needed to complete the video.
Right. Yeah.
And
So
I'm stressing because
It's compounding, right?
it was important. It was important. Let's
Yeah.
just say that.
Yeah.
And so we're looking around for it. Obviously, can't find it. And one of us prayed. I can't remember. Was it
No,
you, Dad?
let me, can I
Yeah.
butt in here?
Yeah,
Since
yeah.
you're the backdrop.
Please.
We're looking for it, and I mean it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. There are leaves and bark and everything probably 3 inches thick, and we know it's within the drone came down in this like half an acre area
It's too big.
of this 3-inch thick debris on the ground, and we're looking for this little thing the size of your fingernail. Now, this is where some of our listeners are going to say, really? I was hearing God. And as we were looking for it, you made a statement. You said, this is like for a needle in a haystack. We might as well give up. And I heard this voice, this conviction. It was strong, and I believe it was God. It said, these boys need to see a God story. You need to show them God. And so I said, let's stop and pray right now. Father God, you know where this is at. We need it. Now pick it up from there. That's what I was praying.
Yeah, so I'm just walking, and kind of like you said, I kind of had already pretty much given up. I'm like, there's no way we're gonna find this. Chances are, and I look down, and sure enough, it's right there on the ground.
Okay, remember you kicked something.
Yeah, I don't remember, but I remember
you
looking down and
kicked.
seeing it.
It was something on the ground, and you kicked it. And when you kicked it, it was right there by your foot.
Yeah, it just really literally appeared out of nowhere, and I was like, hey. Look, I found
That reminds me of a story of Charlie Garcia, because I'm going to give some of mine. We're going to probably continue this for a week or two. But we were up at the camp on Greenhorn Mountain. Do you know what that was called, that camp?
Yenis Hante.
And
Yeah, I just
anyway,
saw it.
long story
days
short, Charlie Garcia walked with God. Him and I walked with God together. And someone had lost their car keys. It was the last day of the camp. And so Charlie said, we got to pray that we can find their car keys. And so Charlie went out and looked all day for them, didn't find them. It snowed that night. And so the next morning, Charlie said, I went out early with a flashlight, me and my son, looking for these car keys, and we couldn't find them. And he said, I heard God speak to my heart. And God said, stop looking. I'm going to show him where his keys are at. He's going to find them. Just stop looking. So he told Scott, we're going to stop looking. And Scott said, why? He said, because I think God just spoke to our heart and said where to stop. He's going to show him where the keys are. Well, the next morning we were down by the cafeteria, and the guy comes driving down smiling in his car. And we said, you found your keys? He said, the doggonest thing happened. He said, we were calling somebody to come up and pick us up. And right as we went out and put the last stuff, outside our cabin, my son said, Dad, can we throw the football 1 or 2 more times? And he said, well, I'll throw you a couple passes, go out. Threw the ball, and it went over the kid's head and landed right beside the car keys.
Wow.
And they found him. And so we're full of these God stories, but let me go back and kind of give an introduction late in the podcast here. But the most important question that begs to be answered by everyone, is God real? Does he exist? Isn't it mind-boggling to know that the Bible makes a promise to everyone that we can have a relationship with God? It's a promise. In fact, the Bible says, if you seek for me with all of your heart, and it says it more than once in the Bible, you will find me. Now, let me ask you a question. We're wouldn't it make a huge difference for everybody in the world, a huge difference in their life for everybody in the world, if they had a relationship with God? Wouldn't that be a game changer?
It would lead to an experience that would answer a lot of questions in their life. If they leaned over and said, I'm going to try this, it would.
Yeah. You know what? The Bible tells us that he will lead us, guide us, speak to us. See, I am fully convinced, 100%, that I walk with the God of the Bible. I walked with him for almost 50 years. And you know what? I might be deceived by something for a year or two, or I might, not be fully convinced of something for a year or two, but slowly but surely I will find out that whatever I'm not fully convinced of probably isn't real or it's not valid or whatever. It would be hard to fool me that God isn't real. You couldn't make me believe that. I'm getting really tongue-tied here right now. In other words, you couldn't pull the wool over my eyes for 50 years.
Yeah.
I'm walking with the God of the Bible. Now, when I got converted, you'll remember, and I think this is redundant, I said, God, I don't want to play church. I will give you my life if you can show me you're real and show me you are still the God of that Bible. I mean, if you can show me that, I'll walk with you for the rest of my life. And I've walked with God for almost 50 years, and he has been spot on with me.
And you've taught me to walk with him 34
And it works for
years. It works amazingly. And it's that trust and that faith that you have to have in what God. So somebody challenged me, Pastor, the other day about my faith system. And they said, well, explain it to us how we can do it. Do you get this idea from the Bible? I go, well, I really do. My pastor's taught me this. I told him, I go, the Holy Spirit lives inside me, and that's the Spirit of Jesus. And I said, one day Jesus told his disciples, I want you to go down, and I want you to get a colt, a donkey colt. And there's a donkey colt down there. And by the way, if anybody comes out and says, what are you doing this for? Say you're getting it for my master, and they'll let you take it. And so these guys go, and they find a donkey colt tied up. And somebody comes out and goes, what are you doing? Oh, our master needs it. And like, oh, okay. I said, that's like Jesus guiding us and leading us, right? It's like, it's like the Spirit of Jesus lives inside me. And he was telling his disciples and giving them an experience that they're going to need to know. And Jesus said, the things you see me do, you're going to do also. And I love those stories because they're real. And like you said, you've learned and you've taught us how to follow that faith system, and it works. And, the thing that it does take, though, is it takes faith.
I think it's also comes down to seeing. A lot of people that, that are Christians, sometimes they fail to see the miraculous thing that constantly happens in your life. And Matthew, Jesus talks about, Matthew 18, Jesus talks about, unless you become like a child, you won't enter the kingdom of heaven. And the idea of kingdom of heaven isn't just about heaven, and this other place, but also that here on earth, like that we won't see the things that God is constantly doing in our lives unless we see things like a child. And like you said, like, we talked about the SD card, like unless you actually believe like God could do something like that, like I know, Josh, you have two little ones. Having a little one, when you tell a kid something, they take it verbatim. Like they don't question it. They don't, sometimes my older ones, they question everything, but my two younger ones, I could tell them something and they take it to they're like, yes, that's true. That's truth. And so you have to be careful with that. But just in our belief, like when we really believe that God can come through, he can help us find an SD card. He can come through for us in Mulegé. He can do all these different things. I mean, that's where you just get converted in your mindset and your thinking.
Well, I think seeing it is important. I mean, and I think the Bible's chock full of all those experiences that God still wants us as believers to have. I think about King Saul. He was looking for his dad's lost donkeys, right? and it wasn't about the donkeys. It was about Saul running into Samuel.
Yes.
Right.
And so when you think about it, it's not about the lost donkeys. It's not about the fact that we're late to try to find a fisherman. It's not about any of that. It's about letting God interact in your life and have one of these things which we do call a miraculous moment.
Right.
Before the podcast, and I think I say this a lot because I feel like we have a conversation before the podcast quite often, but we were talking about how people have different levels of faith and different levels of belief. And we had a discussion yesterday in a staff meeting kind of around the same idea. But one of the thoughts that I had during that meeting was, Dad, you were going through some difficult scriptures with the staff yesterday, and they were hard to understand, but they were also kind of radical in nature. They were, talking about rapture and talking about, Jesus coming back, and if you really believe all this stuff that he said, and I had a thought, and I thought, okay, how many people are out there that believe in God? Right? They say, I believe in God, and I live my life, however I live it, but I do believe in God, right? And then there's other people that are like, I want to know everything that this Bible teaches. And so I think if you are one of the people that just kind of casually believes in God, you have to kind of get to a point where it's like, okay, if you believe God's real, then you believe that he, that the scripture is real, and then you believe all the words of it, then you believe everything. So it's like kind of an all-in situation. Whereas, some people just, it's like, yeah, I believe in a little bit, but I'm not going to really like wrap my entire life around this thing. I'm going to go ahead and live my life, and it'll all work out right in the end. But the truth is that we have the tools to connect with this God who's huge and who's massive. But
But Josh, again, let's go back to a very elementary idea. But the Bible teaches that when you give your life to God, you can actually ask God to send the Holy Spirit, His Spirit, and His Spirit will come and live in you. That's part of the process of being born again. Now, it's not possible to have the Spirit of God living inside of you and not be cognizant of it. For example, for women out there, you can't be pregnant and not know it. We're all unfortunately familiar with a spirit of lust. If a spirit of lust is in you, believe me, you'll know it. If you have a spirit of anger resting upon you, you will know it. A spirit of jealousy, you will know it. You won't be able to get rid of it. You're trying not to be jealous, but you're jealous. In the same way, when the Spirit of God lives inside of you, you cannot deny it. And all those truths about being born again, about the Spirit of God living in you, they're all very valid and they can be counted upon.
You know what I think so interesting is we all get opportunities to experience this. And I said this, and I shared a story, and I don't think I've ever shared it on air, with my son-in-law. He was a engineering student at Fresno State, and he was in his last year. It was the 5th year of school. And he needed classes, and when he went to register for his classes, they were all full. So he went in and talked to professors, could he add their classes? And they said, no, you're just going to have to wait. So I remember him calling me, and I know I wasn't the first call, but he called me to share this story, and I said, okay, because this is my faith system. I said, let's pray, Danny. And so we prayed, and this is my son-in-law who's a believer, but maybe not has experienced God moving in his life like we have. And so as we prayed, we ended the prayer like, God, really, Danny really needs these classes. Now, one of the motivating factors was Danny knew that one of my requirements for him to marry my daughter, which they were engaged at the time, was to graduate. And they had already planned their wedding date, which was a week after he graduated, but now it's going to be put off a year. So I think maybe he was testing the water if I was going to give on that, but I didn't. So we prayed. So the next morning I woke up to a phone call from Danny, and he says, Tom, he goes, I just don't know how to explain this. But I woke up this morning to an email from the head professor over the engineering department, Lyle's engineering department, Fresno State, and said that something had happened to the professor and that all the class schedules were going to have to be redone because this professor wasn't going to be able to fulfill his duty to the school by teaching. And so Danny goes, I've already called my mom, and I've got all my classes. He goes, explain that. I go, I really can't, outside of the fact that we asked the God of the universe
Right.
to get involved.
Right.
You know, and so of course my head went kind of wild, like, you know, and you know, of course my son-in-law would go, why would he do that? I go, because you needed it. And I think that God was seeing further down the road. So I think a lot of people got blessed from this, but I couldn't go any deeper than that. And he graduated within that year, and he married my daughter. And so as we go backwards, it's always been something that he's kind of marked as a milestone in his life with faith as we believe it, not as he's been brought up, but as we believe it.
Well, you know what? My daughter is continually on me to write the book, God Stories. Because I've written 7 books, I know how much work it takes. I'm very, very hesitant. She says, Dad, you can't let these God stories die with you. In fact, she talked to me last week or two, and she says, Dad, do a podcast on God stories.
We did. We started, remember?
We never finished it.
Yeah, I know. But I'm all in on that one.
Well, let me give you a real radical one that's going to go in my book. And it was about the time that I got diagnosed with leukemia. It was 1997, right, Josh? Is that the right year?
96, 97.
97. I was diagnosed with leukemia. And long story short, the doctors at UCLA, one in particular, Dr. Charles Sawyer, was my doctor at the time. And when he diagnosed me, I asked him, I said, give it to me straight and hit me between the eyes with it. How long will I live? Will I live 5 years? And he looked down at the ground, I'll never forget, as if he didn't want to answer the question. He looked back up and he said, you won't live 5 years. He said, you might live somewhere between 4 and 5. And so long story short, I went home and I took that advice and wrote all my kids' birthday cards and told Debbie to save them for 5 years and give them to them one. I wrote 5 years worth. And anyway, one thing and another happened. And I started praying right away to seek God's will, because that's the first thing we should do when we're given a death report. God, am I going to die? Is this the end of life for me? Or do you have more work for me to do? And I wanted to hear from God. I have more stories on what God began to tell me. But one in particular was they put me on chemotherapy. I don't know if you remember that or not. I received in the mail shots of chemotherapy, and I'd receive them once a week or whatever. And I'd give myself 2 shots a day of chemotherapy. And that's what was keeping me alive, according to the doctors. And so if you've ever taken chemotherapy, I took it along with something called interferon. I had to have a bottle of aspirin by my bed. I'd take them during the night. I had to take them before I got up in the morning. I felt horrible. And stopped eating, didn't want to eat. I lost all kinds of weight, not purposely or not from exercise and dieting, but just I didn't want to eat. And so I finally came to a place where I told Debbie, I said, I live for God's will, and God has been faithful to me. And so it was on a Saturday night, and I'll never forget. And again, you'd have to know the backdrop that my wife she's not a talker at all. She doesn't call people and talk to them a lot. She doesn't come to church and socialize. And I promise you, she never shared this with anybody, and I didn't either. But before I went to bed on a Saturday night, I said, Debbie, I cannot do this any longer. I want to throw away my chemotherapy. And so I told her, I said, I'm going to pray a prayer right now. I need a confirmation that this is God's will. And I think it is. It can't be his will that I can't think straight, I can't preach, I can't study, nothing. And I'm looking haggard, look like an old man, more so than I am. And so I said, I'm going to pray that tomorrow at church, Belinda Matley comes up and gives me a word from God. Now, again, at that time, no one gave me words from God. It just didn't happen. So this was going to be a miracle. And Debbie says, well, no, we're not going to be that easy. We're going to pray also that Charlie Garcia gives you a word. If both of those people come up at church and give you a word tomorrow, there's no way that's not a miracle. And then and only then can you throw away your chemotherapy and have it be good with me. So we prayed that night. Lord, cause both of them to come and give me a word. And so the next day I preached my sermon in the first service, and I'll be doggone if Belinda Matley didn't come to the front. And I go, could this be the start of a miracle? Now, she knows nothing. We didn't say a word to anyone. She says, I have a word for you from God. And I go, wow, this is cool. And she said, I was praying and I had this vision or revelation. And I saw you out on a big lake, in the middle of the lake, in a boat with no oars. And I wanted to swim out there and help you. And God said, no, that's right where I want him. And that's all, that's the end of the vision. And I went, wow. I knew right away that was true. That's where God wanted me. I knew that. But I'd received a word. I thought, man, I'm halfway to a miracle. Second service, we completed that. And the third service, I think, at the end, Charlie Garcia sat in the front row and he left with everyone else. And I thought, man, I was halfway to having a miracle. And I went outside to get in my car. I don't think there was any more cars in the parking lot. I was one of the last ones to leave. And I looked up, and here came Charlie Garcia in that little red Corvette, tearing back into the parking lot. He said, I have a word I'm supposed to give you. And I went home. I was convicted of it all morning. And I thought, I've got to come back and give you that word. Well, at that moment, I didn't even care what the word was. I just knew I had a miracle.
Yeah.
And then when you hear the word he gave me, it was really a double miracle. He said, I'm supposed to give you a verse. It's not by might nor by power, by my spirit, saith the Lord. Now, that word power can be translated potency. So what he was telling me was, chemotherapy is not going to save you. It's going to be only by God's word. So I went home, threw my chemotherapy away. Now, again, I'm not telling anyone else to do this. Please listen to me. And when I threw it away, I told my doctor I was throwing it away. And my doctors, I had two of them, freaked out. And they go, this is all that's keeping you alive. I said, but God told me to throw it away. And I did. And, just making a long story short, I sit here today. My last doctor's appointment showed that there is 0 leukemia in my body. And there's a lot of stories in between that time and this. But when I tell that God story and you go back and look at it closely, I mean, you look at everything that's involved in that story. Is there any way in the world, now remind you, I have almost 100 of these stories. Is there any way in the world that could have been a coincidence in your minds? I mean, is there any way you can figure this out to be a coincidence?
I don't think so. And I think that it's important that of what you just said, that there was a lot of things that happened after that word too,
Right.
to now. I think of the Israelites when they were released from Pharaoh. They immediately, were stuck. Well, first of all, they were released by miracles, right? There was the 10 plagues, but then they were immediately stuck at the Red Sea, and God parted the sea, and they went through. That's a miracle, right?
Right.
But then from then on, they still needed miracles in order to get them to where they were supposed to be. But they did give up at one point a little bit, right? And that's when God had to come and chastise them a little bit. I think that what happens with people, and the reason they don't see God in all the things that they could, is that they will get a miraculous moment, at the beginning, but they will stop seeking God after that. They'll say, okay, well, it's done, but it's not done because life is a journey, and there's hill after hill after hill. There's constantly something else, and so we have to keep connected with God. I think you have that whole time.
And I do think that God will do something substantial, and give you kind of like a place where you can plant a flag. And then as you run into other trouble along the way, you realize, well, we planted a flag.
Right.
When Taylor was going to college, she was recruited all over the nation. And she made, what I think is a mistake. She was going to commit to the University of Rhode Island. And I was worried about that because it would take her farther than she's ever been from our house, because you can't get farther than that. But she went to Hume Lake, and she came back, and she goes, Dad, I think God would want me to go to school in Southern California. Now, that's a problem because it's her senior year. Most coaches have got their team set. So, I knew where she wanted to go. And one night we were praying, and she goes, Dad, I'll go where you want me to go, but two schools were kind of ponying up for was scholarships. And so we prayed. I went to bed, and all I could tell you is I had a light show in my head, and it was green and gold, and the other school was purple and gold. And I just had this light show of green and gold in my head. So when she woke up, she goes, Dad, I didn't get anything, but I'll go to the school you want me to. And I go, well, maybe not. I had this dream. So she got really excited about the school she wanted to go. That was green and gold. So I had this light show in my head. So then she goes, well, the first coach that calls me, let's say that's a confirmation. So she called me back. She goes, hey, which one called me? And I go, yeah, Concordia. And she goes, yeah. So I went to work, and this never happens. So in my box, I pulled out a thing, and it said it was a pastor's conference at Concordia. And I looked around, and I go, who put this in my box? Finally, Debbie Tweed, our bookkeeper, said, I did. And I go, why'd you put it in my box? She goes, well, I put it in your box. I didn't figure out who would put it in. I go, well, this is substantial today because this is a school that Taylor's going to, or she wants to go to, and we're thinking about going to. So we planted a flag there like it's Concordia. Well, the coach already had his team set, and he said, well, Taylor, I can give you a walk-on spot. And I go, well, that doesn't do any good for me because we can't afford the school. There's no way we're going to be able to afford this school. And so my wife, we said, let's scrape up what we can. And so we did. And so I packed the truck the night before she was supposed to go and get in the dorm. And my wife goes, Tom, we're going to take her down there and bring her back in a month because we can't afford this school. And I go, I know, but God, this is the school she's supposed to go to, I believe. And so, true story, I was sitting there and a phone rang. So I picked it up, and it was the athletic director at the University of Concordia. And he came back and goes, Tom, he goes, I think maybe the tennis team is taking advantage of your daughter. And I was like, well, yeah. And he goes, so what we've done is the athletic departments got together, and we're going to honor the scholarship that we offered Taylor last year. I go, what? I go, let me put you on speakerphone. So I called Tiffany, and I go, so repeat that. And he said that, and he said, but next year that's going to come out of the tennis budget because the coach is like getting a great deal, but we don't think that's fair. And we just praised Jesus for going, oh my gosh. But it was after the car was packed. My daughter was excited. My wife's looking at me going, Tom, there's no way we can do this. But it was because we felt that was where she was supposed to go. And it's because she got her scholarship for 5 years after that, got her master's degree there. But it was the planting the flag. So like Pastor said, it's when you get those words, you can always go back to that. But God,
I like that analogy after the car is packed.
Yeah. You know what? Oh, it was after the car was packed.
But we've heard these God stories from missionaries and saints down through the years. Like the guy, man of God, that the Lord told him he had to go somewhere. And God said, it's my will. And he says, what do I do? He said, go stand in the ticket line tomorrow. I'll never forget the story. I wish I could find it. And so he says, but I don't have a ticket. Just go stand in the ticket line and act as if you're going. I told you you're going. And so the guy stands in the ticket line, and there's like 4 people in front of him, 3, 2, 1. He goes, what am I doing? I feel like a fool. I don't have a ticket. He said, God said, I'm going to make a way for you to be there. And the guy in front of him got real frustrated. So, you know what? I can't go. It's just, this is dumb. Everything that's happening. Turn around and said, here, you can have my ticket. And I mean, we've heard these stories all our life. But Tom, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
We could speak right now for 4 hours telling you all these things that continually happen because in my walk with God, God is spot on. And you younger guys, you're going to have these stories, but you have to live in such a way, and I've said it many times before, that you'll see what you're looking for. We are looking for God continuously to intervene, to come and guide us, to come and lead us, to come and redirect us. And we live with that faith day by day, and it has not failed me for 50 years. I mean, that's a long test run.
Or me for 34. It's one of those things that as you're out there, you've got to put stock in it. I mean, at one point, Pastor, like you said, there's so many believers out there that are non-believing believers, because they're not putting their stock in a God that can intervene in your daily, everyday life. And once you do lean over to that and you start seeing this, there's no other way to live after that, you know, and as you keep going. But there's sometimes that, you know, even Pastor, you've said this. I mean, my wife, you know, she has a severe case of Crohn's. And Pastor, you've said that we prayed for her to get healed all these years. Well, she never got healed. But she's still here because she's taking a medication. We've prayed through. I mean, I'll never forget that night that you and Josh came down to UCLA. Remember that?
We traveled down there.
I mean, you guys did. And we were sitting there, and it was probably 1 a.m. And I walked out, and I was looking, and here comes Pastor Ron and Josh. And you came into the room. There was those moments where you guys came in and laid hands on Tiffany and prayed for her. So my wife never had a miraculous moment of getting healed, but God has intervened so much in her health all these years that we just know that his hand's in it, but she's enduring through that.
Doesn't it make sense? And I've got a lot to say about this, and we'll probably start bringing this to a conclusion. But if you were God and you looked down the earth and you saw a lot of your kids actually doing your will, this is God's will, and they were doing exactly what you've asked them to do. Now, not all Christians are doing that, but the ones that are, wouldn't you try to sustain their life and keep them on the earth going, you're accomplishing something for me? And that's exactly what he's doing. God never told me, I will heal you of leukemia, cure you. And then I have another cancer now in my body. It's chemical reoccurrence of prostate cancer. And God's never told me, I'm going to heal you of this. He hasn't said that in either one of these. But in both of them, he has spoken and said, I will not let you die of them. In other words, you cannot die until I'm through with you. So doesn't it make sense that if you were God and you had your children on the earth that were really promoting you, they were doing the work that you want done? I've said it many times. I feel sorry for God sometimes because he is love and he doesn't have a body on the earth except for us. And so for those of us that are actually doing what he wants us to do on a day-by-day basis, would it be beyond our comprehension to think that he's saying, I'm not going to heal you necessarily, but I'll keep you there.
Yeah,
I'll do what's necessary to keep you there until my job for you is accomplished.
Absolutely.
And so
I think what you said too is key, what you're looking for. I go back to the story. I mean, the biggest God story is just the empty tomb, the resurrection. And one of the things I love about that story when they talk about the tomb, the Romans believed that Jesus was in the tomb, dead, and the disciples came and said, he's not in there, right? So you had two different perspectives, like what they were looking for. One group believed that he's dead and he's in that tomb. One group believed that it was empty. And one of the coolest things about that story for you guys that don't, and I want to say it's Case for Christ. They talk a lot. Is it Lee Strobel, Case for Christ, right? He talks about the empty tomb. He says one of the things that that the Romans and Jesus' disciples they agree upon is that Jesus isn't in the tomb anymore. Yeah. Because, and what do they say? That they ended up, the Romans, in the Roman Digesta, they said, well, there could be a case where they took the people that were crucified and they would throw them, they would basically give their bodies to the dogs. But he said, we know that Jesus's body was in the grave because he was given to him by Joseph, right? But he said that night when they went back and they said, hey, Jesus isn't in the tomb, they said the disciples said he's not there. And then the Roman guards said, well, you guys stole him, right? But they all agree that he's not in the tomb anymore. And I think it's the way that we look at the story, right? If you believe that God is divine, you're going to say, no, like he's not in there in this. But then you can say, well, then there's so you're always going to be on one side or the other. It depends what you're looking for. And if you're living with a life for God, you're going to see God constantly moving in your life. And you're going to believe that he's miraculously and constantly moving in your life.
Yeah, and I go back to that. Wow, wouldn't you have liked to have been a fly on the wall when they heard that he was alive? I mean, our whole gospel message begins with an outrageous God story. And our God is still wanting to give us those stories in our life. And again, I've said it for years, and it bears repeating. When we start telling these God stories, which I do very often, it's part of my message. There are people that sit out there, and I can understand for some of them, considering where they're at, they go, yeah, fat chance. God doesn't talk anymore to us. He doesn't speak to us. He doesn't do miracles, blah, 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 blah. And I say to them very often, yes, he does, but he will not do it for you. Because he said in the Bible, let it be to you according to your faith. I have believed in the God of miracles for almost 50 years, and that God has performed for me, and that's probably a bad way to put it, but lack of a better way right now. He has come through for me.
He's proved
time
himself.
after
He's
time
proved
after time.
himself.
And again, you know, if it wasn't true, in 50 years, I would have figured this thing out that is not. It is true. And I'm as excited about it today as I was in day one. And so we're going to have to keep this podcast going. I'm just really fired up. I mean, I'm going to cover more God stories every podcast. And maybe some you've heard, maybe some you haven't, that defy understanding.
Well, Pastor, isn't that what you could say that you, because there again, for you to be in the ministry 50 years is just unheard of nowadays. Especially we've just heard that our pastor's life expectancy being in the ministry is 4 years. I mean, you know, and so, so the excitement that you have living this life with Christ, where he's moving your life, is what gets you excited to get back in the pulpit and say, this is real.
And at the same church for 50 years. And we're having our 50-year...
You've defied so many of the statistics.
It's pretty wild.
Would that be wrong of me? I've said before, I wish someone would donate the money. They did before, and I believe they will. I can't take it out of tithe money. But I hope this isn't arrogancy or whatever, but it would be okay. I want to celebrate 50 years with with a fireworks show.
Oh, you're going to do that.
And I'm just so excited about it that I've been here 50 years. And I don't want it to come off that way, but I'm just so excited. Maybe I'll pay for it myself. I'll go out and sell weenie dogs out in front of Costco or something to get the money.
We can just make our own fireworks. So.
I just want to savor the moment and just going, wow, this is so cool.
I want to add one more thing. I know we're going into fireworks. It's a thought though that stuck, and I feel like I need to say it. It's like, it's one of those God moments where you feel like you have to say this. You said for people that doubt some of these God stories, they'll miss them because of their lack of faith. But also too, there's a story right after Jesus dies. One of the guys, Thomas, he's known
doubting
for
Thomas, my namesake.
We know him for doubting Thomas. He says, "Unless I see, I won't believe." And I think if you're there today, you're listening to some of these God stories, you're looking at the moment. Maybe you heard the SD card story, the cancer story, Tom's collegiate story, whatever those. You're hearing them, you're like, well, God, unless this. I would say that's an okay prayer to say, like, God, like, show up in my life. I want to see you move in this way. I think that's a safe prayer to and not feel like that you're doubting God or that you're that you don't believe in God, but that you want to see God miraculously moving your life.
In the story, Thomas says, "Unless I see for myself," and I think that there was an anticipation and excitement because I think he actually wanted to see. He wanted to see himself. Yeah. He's like, unless I see myself, I want to see.
Well, and Jesus even told him, "Blessed are those who haven't seen and believed."
Well, that's the other part of that that whole thing is all the God doesn't just appear at when we talk about Jesus' resurrection, he didn't just appear to a couple people. He appeared to many people after his resurrection. And
didn't even Thomas, because I love this story because it's my namesake. Didn't even Thomas says, "I want to see the nails in his hands, and I want to see the." Yeah. And Jesus came and he goes, "Here, look at my hands." "No, I'm okay. I don't need that." No.
You do need to see it.
I think for our audience, it's not hard for them to see that we're flat excited about this topic.
Yes.
And if it wasn't that real to us, we wouldn't be so excited about it. No one can ever come along and say, "Hey, your walk with God is illegitimate. It's not right on." Baloney. Baloney. We know it is. I know we're probably, and again, I'm not.
We're coming back, huh?
Oh, we're definitely. I mean, this time we're definitely
perfect.
Okay. Well, anyways, we're excited, and we probably will continue this, but we're not fully sure. But we definitely are going to keep talking about God, and we're going to keep talking about His role in our lives because that's who we are. It is Off the Mountain podcast, which started last year after a men's retreat because we were up on the mountain and we had all these God stories up there, and then we came back down and we were like, we need to have these moments and these experiences all the time. When you stay,
we had between 400 and 500 men on the mountain
this year,
and again, why would these men be coming from all over the place if what we were preaching wasn't true and didn't work? They wouldn't be coming. I mean. The Bible says that if we meet certain conditions, we'll be prosperous in whatever we do. Yeah. All throughout the last few decades, we've been so blessed by God because I think we have the right message. And everywhere we go, we don't have the problem of how to grow a church. It's we never have enough room for the people that are coming.
And it was really cool up there at that Men's Retreat. Just one more thing I'll say about this, and we'll wrap up. But it was really cool to see millionaires next to newly paroled.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Newly paroled. Parolees.
Yeah, like it was cool to see just the gamut of different types of people up there worshiping God together and finding common ground because of who God is. And to me, that's a huge God story right there, that there's these different types of people that get together.
And the people don't understand. We're not talking about a traditionalized church movement.
No.
These are some of the toughest guys I've ever seen in my life. And we got bikers, probably ex-Hells Angels. We've got big old thug-looking guys, ex-gangsters, and then we have sitting next to them doctors, lawyers, attorneys, and it's such a fine mix of people. And these
we
men,
have some lawyers that actually represented some of the criminals in this same
Yes,
room.
we do. In the same very room.
'Cause that's fun.
we were in a group a while back, Tom, you might remember, and everybody's going sharing their story. I forgot what we were at a men's retreat at Old Oak Ranch. And one dude was sharing a story, man, I'm a thug. You know what I do? Sometimes I still fall. I still do bad things. And he just really put it all out there. And nobody knew each other in that group. And the next guy said, well, I'm a police officer. And the guy goes,
Yeah,
what all
that's
did I
funny.
share?
That's funny. Well, anyways, thanks guys for listening. We appreciate you guys. We love you, and we hope you have a great, great week. We'll see you next week.
Yes, God bless.
You got your mama's sunshine, you got your daddy's rain. You're like a piece of heaven